I'd really like to welcome Murliji um, for today's talk. We are really blessed to have him. I actually fondly call him Murli Uncle. I have had the good fortune of working with him at the Valley School in Bangalore for 2 years. Murliji has been with the Krishnamurti Foundation schools for over 2 decades in various capacities as a teacher, as a hostel parent, and more recently, he has also been anchoring the Krishnamurti Study Center in Bangalore. Murli Uncle has also worked in the corporate sector before he came into education. He was a corporate trainer. He was into marketing for almost 14 years. But I would really like to just highlight how much he is loved, absolutely adored by children on campus. If I would just say, as if you saw him walking by, kids would just gravitate towards him like honeybees. So that's really a hallmark of a teacher who has really done a good job. And I really also have been blessed to have had him as a mentor. He's super passionate about J. Krishnamurti's teachings and bringing them into wider circles in supporting schools, teacher training, holding education seminars around the theme of J. Krishnamurti and learning. So with that introduction, I would like to invite Murli Uncle to please take it forward.
Thank you so much, Vipul, and thank you, Anadi Foundation and Dharma Gurukulam for inviting me for today's session. Let me share the screen to begin the presentation. So when Vipul invited me for this session, education and the significance of life, that's a topic I thought of doing the presentation. Education and Significance of Life is the name of a book by J. Krishnamurti. And the first chapter is circulated for all of us to understand what is this presentation about. And my presentation is based on just the first chapter. The subject is vast and the time is short. So I have made a short presentation with about 10-11 slides, taking few sentences from the book, the first chapter, and also some video clippings, some on Krishnamurti and some on relevant social media popular video clips. So I just thought with this, I will be able to give a brief introduction. It would have been nice if I know you personally and you are sitting in front of me and we are having a dialogue. But unfortunately, we are in this format. I'm just taking a risk of sharing whatever I assume and then, going ahead of that. Education and Significance of Life is a very popular book. And in the vast majority of us, there is no real discontent. This is taken from the book. Now, fortunately, there are a few who are in earnest, who are willing to examine our human problems without prejudice. So I hope we are such a group together examining concerns on education. To understand life is to understand ourselves, and that is both the beginning and the end of education. This is a very profound statement found in this first chapter. How do we really go into such a topic? But I only bow down to all the parents, all the educators, every single person who is contributing in some way or the other to the cause of education. Having said that, let us listen what Krishnaji has to say on teaching.
I think being a teacher is the greatest profession in the world because they are preparing a new generation of people. Not the politicians, not the scientists, not the businessman, nor the gurus. Teaching, in a sense, helping the students throughout the world to be good human beings.
When you hear Krishnaji saying so great about teaching as the greatest profession, you will be very keen to know what is the model education module he had proposed. I'm afraid none. I had been part of 3 Krishnamurti schools. They are, in one sense, one school, but they are unique geographically, structurally, and also the practices, the pedagogy, and the curriculum. They are as distinct as they are appearing. The first school, Sahyadri, where I was in, was on a hillock. 360 degrees, we could see the beautiful earth all around us. Whereas the second school in Varanasi was on the bank of river Ganga. And the present school where I am associated with valley, as the name suggests, it is in a valley, completely covered with vegetation. So anybody who comes to any of these schools will definitely feel the warmth, the nature, and also a sense of freedom. Probably that is what the greatest module K suggested. But having said that, Krishnaji also say education is very simple. It is as simple as a mother trying to teach her child under a tree. It doesn't need such vast, surroundings or buildings. But what conventional education is doing, conventional education makes independent thinking extremely difficult. I have just selected one of the popular social media clip. Let us just listen.
Communicate. I guess I'm just a playdate to you.
I'm sorry for using this clip, but I thought it gives a sample of conventional education. Conventional education can be attractive or repulsive. As an adult educator, parent, when we are watching the clip, we may immediately feel the first one is very nice. I really want to be like that. I want to treat my children in that way. When I see the second clip, maybe I will feel, no, I don't want to hit children. I don't want to punish children. I don't want to, make them feel bad when they come to the school. So both these feelings are coming from our own conditioning. We always approach to a problem with a like or a dislike. So is that what conventional education unknowingly have done to us? To be different from the group or to resist environment is not easy and is often risky as long as we worship success. This is also another profound statement from this first chapter. Let us just watch the clip. It is nicely, depicting what education is all about.
दिल है छोटा सा, छोटी सी आशा, मस्ती भरे मन की भोली सी आशा। चांद तारों को छूने की आशा, आसमानों में उड़ने की आशा। दिल है छोटा सा, छोटी सी आशा, मस्ती भरे मन की भोली सी आशा। महक जाए तू आज दो ऐसे फूल बगिया में, महके हो जैसे बादलों की तू ओढ़े चुनरिया। भीग जाए तू बन के बाबरिया, अपनी चोटी में बांध ले दुनिया। दिल है छोटा सा, छोटी सी आशा, मस्ती भरे मन की भोली, मस्ती भरे मन की भोली सी आशा। चांद तारों को छूने की आशा, आसमानों में उड़ने की आशा। दिल है छोटा सा, छोटी सी आशा, मस्ती भरे मन की भोली सी आशा। महक जाए तू आज दो ऐसे फूल बगिया में, महके हो जैसे बादलों की तू ओढ़े चुनरिया। भीग जाए तू बन के बाबरिया, अपनी चोटी में सा छोटी सी आशा चांद तारों को छूने की आशा आसमानों में उड़ने की आशा दिल है छोटा सा छोटी सी आशा मस्ती भरे मन की भोली सी आशा
I think you enjoyed the video clip. We are all wonderful people as we are growing up. We may not understand the evaluation, the exams, and the expectations ever, but we just go from one mold to another mold unknowingly, and we worship success, and we cry, weep when we are failed by the system. The purpose of education is not to produce mere technicians and job hunters, but integrated men and women who are free of fear. I really wonder, is that happening in conventional education?
One listens to a lot of these ideas and draws a conclusion, an abstraction of what one has heard, and that abstraction becomes a principle, an ideal, a thing to be achieved. Whereas if one listens without the abstraction taking place, just listens to the whole psychological movement of fear, not make an idea of it, but actually observe it as one observes a marvelous mountain. You can't do anything about it. It is there. Similarly, to observe this whole nature of fear, and in that observation there is no dissipation of energy, and that hence the totality of that energy wipes away fear entirely.
I wonder whether the education all over the world is concerned about gathering energy to wipe away fear which is in human mind. And the educated must be infinitely pliable and therefore free of theories and particular patterns of thought. A spider is not educated, but it is infinitely pliable and free in the web. It is never stuck in the web, whereas the education cultivating thought and worshipping the abilities of thought is caught by thought. Thought is the trap. We are the trap. So, what is the good of learning if in the process of living we are destroying ourselves? We are destroying ourselves for surely because we are caught in the trap, and all our solutions in the thought is limited. One solution gives rise to several other problems. We are almost on the verge of destroying the whole planet, being highly educated species.
It's an insane world. You understand? There is no sanity in the political world, in the religious world, right? In the economic world, there is no sanity. Don't be corrupt inside. Don't seek vanity, pride. Don't say I'm superior to somebody else. You know, you learn a great deal when there is humility. You know the word humility? You learn a great deal if you're really humble. But if you're merely seeking success, money, 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 power, position, status, you understand? Then you're beginning with corruption. You might be poor. Be poor. Who cares? That's why it's important for you, for all of you, to find your own talent and stick to it, even though it doesn't bring you success, fame, and all that, which is all nonsense anyhow, because we're all going to die. You understand, old boy? While you live, live. Not with all the rubbish that's going on.
So then, why don't people realize this, sir?
Because they don't think, they don't feel, they are thinking about themselves all the time. Their job, their administration, their work. You understand? They're not interested in this. Very few are.
Are we not in the same situation? We are surrounded by people who are completely ignorant what they are doing. They don't feel. And look at that innocent boy asking. Do we ask, or have we stopped asking? Discover the true values which come with unbiased investigation and self-awareness. You know, there is a wealth, a treasure to be discovered within us. Is the education, is the learning helping us to do that? I'm not sure.
What is actually learning? Is it merely memory operating, accumulation of great deal of information, knowledge about various subjects which have their own discipline, their own way, and gradually the brain follows certain categories, certain grooves, and so those grooves and categories and specializations become a means of accumulating knowledge, memory, and operating from that memory. This is what we call learning. But learning is also implies a constant movement, a brain that is not only burdened with knowledge of mathematics, geography, history, or computer, and so on, but also the brain must be active, inquiring, questioning, doubting. Knowledge becomes static when you have accumulated a great deal. It becomes repetitive, static. But learning is a movement. And therefore it's never static, it's living. Each one of us, the self, the me, the persona, what you will call, what you like, whatever name you give to this psyche, is a bundle of memories. We may think we are great spiritual entities, gods, or all the rest of that business, but it's still memory. We are a bundle of memory. But whereas learning, not merely accumulating knowledge, but moving further away from knowledge, constantly, is the act of learning. That learning brings its own discipline, which is to order. Therefore, order is a living thing, not conformity, pattern, following a pattern, which doesn't mean that you change from day to day to day. That's what you're all doing, going after various fads. But learning implies tremendous observation. Observation without motive. The moment you have motive, that motive is static, because that motive is born out of memory. We all live by motives. Sexual motive, motives of pleasure, motives of wanting, gratifying, achieving illumination, all that, enlightenment, all that. We live by motive.
Isn't it, K, indicating that there is a learning quite different from this accumulative learning, which education is completely dependent on? And doing that, education is encouraging conformity and doing some harm by making the persona, the accidental, unduly important. Systems, whether educational or political, are transformed when there is fundamental change in ourselves. The individual is of first importance, not the system. That means the educator, whether you are a teacher or a parent, and your child in front of you is the most important thing, not a system, not any pedagogy.
Look at that oak tree. Actually look at it. You are the observer, and the oak is the observed. There is a space between you and the thing, which is the tree. In that interval of space is time. Right? The time that has to be covered to see, that's the object. In that interval of space, there are all kinds of ideas which actually prevents me from seeing the fact of that. When you no longer name, no longer thought functioning as knowledge about that tree, then is there a space between you and the tree? Then, if you go into it very deeply and observe all this, then the observer is the observer, which is not the observer identifies himself with the tree. Observer is the observed, and the observer has always acted as though the observed is something different from himself. Then he could act. But when he realizes that the observer is the observed, all action ceases on his part. And therefore all effort. And therefore there is no fear at all. This requires a great deal of inward inquiry, inward observation, step by step without coming to any conclusion. If you observe very closely, and that's one of the most arduous things, and that doesn't need effort at all, just to sit of an afternoon whenever you have time and leisure to look at it. Look at a flower, look at yourself. Look at all the movement of your thought and your feelings and your reactions. Just to observe without any choice, which is the beginning of self-knowing. And without self-knowing, man is caught everlastingly in confusion and misery.
Thank you so much. Looking forward to have an open discussion as friends. Let me stop sharing the screen.
Thank you so much, Murli uncle. Such a vast topic that you've given us a gist, a sense of Krishnamurti's teachings, and especially its relevance in educational space. So it would be nice. We have about 10 minutes of interaction time. We can just jump straight in. Mona ji has raised her hand, so please, Mona. We'll keep it short and concise, the question.
Namaste, Murli ji. Thank you so much for that beautiful talk. You know, at the beginning, Vipul mentioned that when you're on campus, you attract students like honeybees. Based on the educational philosophy that you just discussed, can you please tell us what are some things that you have been doing in practice?
Thank you, Mona. Vipul, I think, gave an opportunity to describe in an exaggerated way, probably. I think all teachers, I feel that we need to be friendly to the students, first of all, because I'm called as an uncle or sir, and Didi or Akka, if it is a counterpart, a female. Mainly because, you know, we should be living as a family. And actually, when we are in a family school, they don't, feel any difference between the two. Actually, they enjoy much more freedom than from their home. And if you are there to listen to them, if you are not there with your agenda, forcing them, you know, with whatever intention you have in mind, they love to learn. They are always available, receptive. And in that process is such a joy, you know. So they loved the teachers. And I also discovered that it is possible for me to survive as a teacher, as a friendly teacher. I think that is one of the most important things, that you don't, you know, act from a pedestal. You are one among them.
Thank you. So no agenda. I think that's,
No
that's
agenda.
really, really important to remember. Thank you.
Thank you, Mona.
Can I ask a question?
Yes, Shefali.
Yes, Shefali, please.
We are working with young adolescents and youngsters and teenagers. Can you hear me?
Yes, yes, a little
Yes.
louder.
We sometimes do have an agenda when we have walked into the classroom to teach a subject, a topic. And there are times when children do not want to study a particular thing. Then in that case, or they don't want to study, or they don't want to participate in an activity, they have their voice. And in that, when you're saying we work with them with an approach of friendliness, how do you create a balance? I'm curious to understand.
Yes, Shefali, are you asking when you are talking as teenagers, say 15, 16, 17? Yeah. Yeah. So you have actually differential age groups and they are in different spaces. Handling them is quite different. But what work with all this age group is affection, love, and your care. And if you are able to establish that you care for them, they are ready to listen. There are days sometime one child may not be interested, or one child may not be wanting to do what you want him or her do. But if you are accommodative, they will definitely learn. And after all, they are learning in spite of us. You know, it is amazing that this is a discovery teachers can really make. I'm not talking just like this because I see teachers who struggle. Also, I see teachers who have really passionately holding themselves and the class in such an affection and care. And even, 1 week back, when children had come physically, they were more concerned when they went back. There was one child who was reported to be COVID positive. They were so concerned. Did I give it to my teacher? I was very closely talking to you, though with my mask. So they are also concerned. They are also affectionate. But if we are pressurized with our agenda, we feel, an urgency to finish our agenda, and that is being insensitive. Probably that is being violent. Did I answer?
Yes.
Anand has his hand up.
Thank you, Vipul. Thank you, Murli. Uncle, I know we can't say so, but nevertheless, it's good to have that feeling coming in. So thanks for emphasizing that in this session. One curiosity is, and it's perhaps coming in from where I am right now, so it may not be fully aligned with the way of thinking that the KF school brings in. But the aspect of perseverance, discipline, etc. And I mean, at some level, that has to sort of come in. I mean, one is looking at applying that tool and the more application and all of it. And young minds sometimes may not, let's say, be willing to do it. So how do you bridge that gap? And perhaps it's a little linked to the earlier question by Shefali ji, that if especially there is a need to do something concerted, there's an action to be taken while you're in a school environment, but there is perhaps the unwillingness to do so. And every time a student may not understand that why is it being done, then how does that channeling happen, saying that directing the energy in that space? So curiosity there, if I may place it there.
Yeah, sure. It is I feel it is our responsibility to educate our children, the academics, that academic excellence is a compulsory thing. But our school education is geared up with a particular kind of package, and we really don't know whether the child is interested in that or not. So when we push them through this kind of a system, it becomes very difficult. But it is very difficult for a child to fail. Even if the little things which they learn, and if the teacher is able to give them that 30%, 20% of the required thing, the child will pass in flying colors. He may not be, rank holder, that's okay. But if the child feel confident, and if the teacher feel, okay, this is the ability of the child, maybe in this point, in this particular subject, and I'm not going to push them, they feel comfortable sailing through. Now, can there be a mentor, a teacher who is freely available for, the student, especially in the teenage group, where they not only talk about your academic problem, there could be many other problems. They are distracted thoroughly by many other things. That is what is happening in the world. So if they are open, sometimes it has nothing to do with your subject or your, way of teaching. It is something else bothering the child. So can we really be a friend, establish that relationship, and really concerned about their, being good and doing good? Then you see that some children, it's a cakewalk. Some children, it is not that cakewalk, but that's okay. They are yet to find their talent. Let us help them to find their talent, not what academics or what the curriculum or the board demands. So is it possible for a teacher to be a facilitator in helping the child to find their talent and assure them they are on the right track and help them, with the minimum possible? I think it's a challenge, but at the same time, it is possible.
Understood. Thank you.
Thank you, Murli uncle. There's one question from Tejasvi. Could you please explain again the first and second statement by Krishnamurti, where he says learning is understanding ourselves and it is the beginning and end of education?
That's a very profound statement I've just chosen from the chapter. You see, if we understand the user manual properly before using a gadget, things become easier. Otherwise, also we will learn, but we will never function in full capacity. I think the human potential can be understood by self-knowing. Now, when I'm not pressurized, when I'm at ease, I can actually face any challenge, and I can, face the challenge, meet the challenge adequately. Now, this potential is in every human being. But when they are afraid, when they are limited by their own fears, and that is compounded by the education system, they are crippled, then they have to find shortcuts. So there is no solution out there, but it is only in self-knowing. And probably that is the beginning and end of education. Tejasvi, I wish we can have another session on this. It is such a beautiful topic. Thank you for asking that.
Thank you so much. We are time, 6:15. I know this can really extend, and I'll share on the Google the readings that Murliji has sent. And he's very approachable. We can also ask him or get in touch with him further. From my little understanding, closing comment I'll also offer is, or what I remember, is J. Krishnamurti saying learning happens in leisure, where there is no pressure. And in this this tussle around discipline, around making sure students are following something, it would come when there is inner awareness that can be awakened for the child to then take their own responsibility. So that really is the, if at all, any agenda to awaken that self-awareness and intelligence. Rest can then follow from that. Just a concluding comment. Any pressing question? I'll share the email address and details. Any last comment, question? We have Rameshji already here, but we'll take just a minute maybe before transition. Yeah, thank you. Okay, so thank you so much. I know Murliji has to leave for another engagement, but thank you so much for being with us, Murli Uncle, and I'm sure you will receive some requests for the engagement.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Vipul. Thank you so much, Gurukula.
So namaste, Rameshji. A warm welcome to you to the Bodhi program on behalf of Anadi Foundation. We are really blessed to have your presence. Again, we have a very deep topic theme that we have requested you to cover, Sri Aurobindo and the Mother's philosophy. I'll just briefly offer Rameshji's very interesting, very diverse, very rich introduction. So Dr. Ramesh Bijlani is a medical doctor, educationist, writer, inspirational speaker, teacher, scientist, and above all, a person committed to using his unique blend of talents for touching the hearts and lives of his fellow beings. He studied at AIIMS in Delhi, and then later at MIT, did his master's course in nutrition. For over 30 years, he has been a faculty at AIIMS. And in '92, he started going to the depths of understanding integral yoga by Sri Aurobindo and the Mother. When he was conferred as an honorary doctorate by S. Vyasa University in Bangalore in 2006. He has written extensively he has 17 published books and working at Sri Aurobindo Ashram since 2007. He describes himself, this is something I found really interesting. Dr. Bijlani describes himself as a pharmacist who dispenses small doses of love and wisdom from the inexhaustible pharmacy of Sri Aurobindo and the Mother. So with that, I warmly welcome you, Rameshji, and please.
Thank you for a very generous introduction. I'm in the unenviable position of being a speaker late in the evening, and on top of that, speaking after a very interesting presentation made by Mr. Murthy. Maybe the best I can do is to start with some of the things which Mr. Murthy said, that education should not be founded on fear, and that the teacher should love her students. This is something basic which Aurobindo and the Mother have also emphasized. And in fact, it said that the outcome in education depends first on how much the teacher loves her students. Apart from loving her students, the second thing is she should love teaching. And the third, she should know how to teach. And the fourth, she should know the subject that she has to teach. And these are all important in that order. So the most important thing is that she should love her students. Then, he talked about the students learning in spite of us. Sounds a little contrary to what teaching is all about. Why are we there for if the students can learn in spite of us? We might as well get out of their way. But you might have observed that, in fact, the students do learn on their own rather than because we teach. And the first principle of teaching that Sri Aurobindo has talked about is that nothing can be taught. Well, if nothing can be taught, then why are the schools and colleges there? Why are the teachers there? They are there to create a learning environment. If the learning environment is provided, then the students can learn on their own, quite a bit, at least. And you might have in fact seen that the best outcome in a class is when you may not be very thoroughly prepared with a very rigid lesson plan. When your lesson plan is fluid and flexible, so that you are keeping in mind from moment to moment the reactions of the students and being guided by that apart from your lesson plan, that is the day on which the teaching goes the best. The students, unless they are thirsty for knowledge, will not learn, no matter how well the teacher teaches. And then, he talked about there being no strict agenda, and the primary goal being to help the child discover what that child is best at, what the child is made for. And that, in fact, is this, in a way, the second principle of teaching enunciated by Sri Aurobindo, which is that the child's mind should be consulted in its own growth. So we try to find out what the child really is made for, and then provide a variety of stimuli in the environment so that the child can also discover what the child is best at. So since I've talked about the first and the second principle, I might as well talk about the third principle. And the third principle of teaching, according to Sri Aurobindo, is that we should move or work from the near to the far, which means from easy to complex, from what the student is familiar with to what the student is not familiar with. And these are the three basic principles of teaching which Sri Aurobindo has given us. With this little background, let me now go to the slides. So this is the topic, Sri Aurobindo's vision of education. And before I go further, let me bring to all of you the love and blessings of the Mother and Sri Aurobindo from Sri Aurobindo Ashram, Delhi branch. Their system of teaching is called integral education. Sri Aurobindo gave the philosophy. The Mother had exactly the same philosophy, and the Mother gave it a practical shape in the school that she established at Sri Aurobindo Ashram in Pondicherry in the year 1943. And therefore, in fact, you cannot separate from Sri Aurobindo from the Mother. And they're both having the same philosophy and contributed to the philosophy as well as giving it a practical shape. Now, what does the word integral really refer to? The word integral means total, and the totality referred to here is the totality of the person. Now, what is the totality of a person? Is it a combination of the body and the mind? Some might say that, well, that may not be the totality, but at least for the purposes of education, we can take that as the totality, because if we have educated both the body and the mind, what else is left that is really important in education? To understand why there is something else that is also important, let's first try to sort of think a little and reflect over it. After all, what are the body and the mind? They are just instruments for action in the outer world. And while having a good instrument is important and necessary, it is not sufficient. For example, a knife is an instrument, but with the same knife, we may chop fruits and vegetables, or we may stab somebody, which means that not only is it important to sharpen the instrument, but any good system of education will also try to ensure that the instrument is put to good use. And that applies also to the body and the mind, which are our instruments. If a person is physically fit, emotionally stable, and intellectually agile, this person will be able to be a better teacher, a better engineer, a better doctor, a better manager, a better scientist, because these are the basic instruments which are used for no matter what type of work we do. But then just try to think, if a terrorist is physically unfit, emotionally unstable, and intellectually dull, will he be able to launch a successful terrorist attack? He'll fail and he'll get easily caught. Which means that if this person, this would-be terrorist, also sharpens the instruments, the body and the mind, and becomes physically fit, emotionally stable, and intellectually agile, he has a better chance at being a successful terrorist. Now, if a system of education helps a teacher as much as it helps a terrorist, it cannot be an acceptable or a good system of education. So what is it that we should add to the improvement of the performance of the body and the mind? And what is the basis? The basis lies in what we are, because besides the body and the mind, we are also a soul. And instead of going into the deeper philosophy, which can get complex as well as time consuming, I'll bring out the importance of the soul through a story. The story is Kavya makes up her mind. And Kavya is a girl about 10. One day in her class came one of her friends, Adya, with a beautiful clip, a hair clip, which resembled a butterfly. And Kavya liked that clip very much. Now it so happened that at the end of the day, when they were all leaving school, Kavya and Adya were amongst the last ones to leave. Adya was a little ahead of Kavya, and the hair clip that she had slipped out of her hair and fell. Kavya thought of calling her and giving this clip back to her, but soon changed her mind. She changed her mind in spite of the fact that she had earlier made up her mind to be a good person. But then in spite of that, she changed her mind and picked up the clip and quietly slipped it into her bag. Now, as she was traveling in the school bus, in which Adya was also there, there is a chain of thoughts that she had. The first thought was, let me return the clip to Adya. But then she thought, I like the clip so much. And then she thought, if I return the clip to her now, she will say, why didn't you give it to me immediately as soon as you saw it drop? And then she started thinking that maybe the best thing would have been to leave the clip where it was. But then she thought that if I had left the clip where it was, somebody else would have taken it. And if somebody else had to get it, and Adya had to lose it anyway, why not I get it? And then she thought, if Adya loses a clip, she'll learn a lesson. In future, she'll be more careful with her things. And then came the master stroke of reasoning. She said, God knew that I like the clip very much. God loves me. That's why he made her drop the clip and made me see it. Why should I give back what God himself has given me? And while all these thoughts were going on in her mind, she got down from the bus stop. First, she got down from the bus and went home. Now, this is something that went on in her mind at home also. But then the next day, Adya told the teacher yesterday I lost my clip in the school. The teacher asked everybody in the class, did anybody find it? Everybody kept quiet. Kavya also kept quiet, but started feeling very uneasy inside. And then the teacher said, maybe one of you picked it up. You didn't know whose it is. Now that you know whose it is, please give it back to Adya. Still everybody kept quiet. Kavya also kept quiet and felt still more uneasy. Finally, the teacher told Adya, sorry, my dear child, nobody saw your hair clip. Please take better care of your things in future. Now, Kavya thought, I had also thought that if she loses a clip, she'll learn to take better care of her things. The teacher has said the same thing. So now the chapter is closed. But the chapter refused to close. The clip traveled every day in her bag, from the school to home and from home back to school. She didn't want to take it out at home because her mother would ask her, and where is this clip from, whose it is? And therefore there's no opportunity to use it. It kept lying in her bag. It traveled from home to school and from school to home for a few days. And although the teacher had closed the chapter, Adya was no longer talking about it. Kavya could not forget it. And finally, she thought that I should do the right thing and return the clip. But then when should I return it? When nobody is seeing it. But then she thought she didn't get such an opportunity. And she thought, what is the guarantee? I may return it to her when nobody else is watching, but she might still tell the other children. She might still tell the teacher, and the teacher might punish me. And the whole class will think I'm a thief, and so on and so forth. So let it keep lying in the bag. She thought now the chapter is closed, but the chapter still didn't close. And she found that she was finding it very difficult to concentrate in the class. She couldn't pay attention to anything. And then she remembered she had decided to be a good person. So she said, a good person doesn't steal. If a good person makes a mistake, she speaks up, and she speaks up no matter what. Even if she gets a punishment, she's not afraid of it. So no matter what, I have to say what I have done. And so she got up and told the teacher, the other day, when you asked the class who had got Adya's clip, in fact, I had picked it up. I didn't speak up, and that was wrong. And I kept the clip all these days. That was also wrong. Now I want to confess and speak the truth. I want to give the clip back to Adya, and you can give me any punishment you like for all the wrong things I have done. And she started crying. The teacher asked her, it's obvious that all these days you suffered quite a lot because you had picked up the clip. How are you feeling now? She said, now I feel as if a big burden is off my head. I'm feeling very relieved. So the teacher told her that the suffering that you went through all these days after picking up the clip is your punishment. And the relief that you're feeling now is your reward. I'll neither give you any punishment for whatever wrong things you did, nor will I give you any reward for speaking up and speaking the truth. And this, is in keeping with one of the golden principles which the mother has given. A fault confessed must be forgiven. So the child had confessed what she did, and therefore the teacher didn't punish her. And why it is important is that otherwise the child would feel that if I had not confessed, the teacher would have never known. And now that I have confessed, I'm being punished. So might as well tell a lie in future. And therefore the child should not be punished. The child should be forgiven. But then does the story end there? No. We should take the child through a reflection. And that's what the teacher did when she asked her how she felt all those days until she spoke up, how she's feeling now. And indirectly, she drove home the message to the child that when you do something wrong, you feel uneasy, you feel guilty, and that is a punishment. And when you do something right, you feel good, you get peace of mind, and that is your reward. Which means that we have an innate sense of what is right and wrong. And associated with it is a reward and punishment system. And therefore, we don't really have to get a punishment or reward from outside. That comes from within. And we'll see why that is important in a few minutes. So now, we have unwittingly ended up talking about the totality of the being. The totality of the being is not just the body and the mind, but also the soul. Because if you go through the different types of voices that Kavya was hearing as you were traveling in the bus, they were coming from different parts of the being. The mind has two aspects, feeling and thinking. And when she said, I like the clip so much. Now that's a feeling, that's something which comes from the feeling part of the mind. It's an emotion. It doesn't go into any reasoning. She felt tempted because she liked the clip very much and she picked it up. And when she started reasoning, that is this other part of the mind, thinking. When she started thinking about it and started reasoning, then she came up with so many reasons which could just justify her wanting the clip. Like, for example, if I had left it where it was, somebody else would have got it. If somebody had to get it, why not I get it? If I keep the clip and Adya loses it, she'll learn a lesson for future. She'll keep her things more carefully. And then finally, God himself has given me the clip. Why should I return for something that God has given me? Now, these are all reasons that were coming from her intellect, from the thinking part of the mind. So, when we feel tempted to do something wrong, the interesting thing is that the intellect, which is normally expected to save us from getting exploited by our intellect, and if it's exploited by the intellect, simply find reasons to justify what we feel like doing anyway. Her intellect started supporting the emotional part of her being. But then how about the soul? It was the soul that told her a few times, return the clip. A good person speaks the truth, no matter what. Now, that is the type of assertive, clear, and emphatic voice which comes from the soul. And this is the soul that was guiding her towards the right thing to do. If we go into these different parts of the being, using Sri Aurobindo and the mother's terminology to some extent, we find that the soul has two aspects. One is the static aspect. The static aspect, which we are all familiar with, we feel that we have an immortal part, which we call the soul. And it is the psychic being which tells us very quickly, very clearly, in unmistakable terms, what the right thing to do is. It's our infallible guide. Provides situation-specific guidance. What is the right thing to do in a particular situation? And so far as the body and the mind are concerned, they are mere instruments. And once the mind has been influenced by the psychic being, if we let this light from the psychic being affect our decisions at the emotional and intellectual level, then the poor body behaves like a docile instrument. It will do what the mind tells it to do. So the important thing is to let this infallible guide, our psychic being, this dynamic aspect of the soul, which we sometimes call in common language, our inner voice. The voice coming from the depths, the voice coming from the deepest parts of the being. If we let this voice illumine our mind, then we will be able to choose what is right. Now, in integral education, the psychic being is not the fourth aspect of education. And this is a common misunderstanding that integral education is about education of the body, the emotional part of the being, the intellect, around which the education of the body, the emotional part of the being, and the intellect revolves. Sri Aurobindo often referred to the body as the physical part of the being, the emotions as the vital part of the being, and the intellect as the mental. And the psychic being is the pivot around which the education of these
We lost your presentation, Rameshji. Hello?
Yes. So this is where we were. We were at the psychic being the pivot or the center around which the education of the body and the mind having these two aspects, the feeling and the thinking. What it means is that, of course, education involves education of the body and the mind. These instruments should perform better. But along with that, what is also important is that the child gradually learns to use these instruments in light of that infallible guide, the psychic being, so that the instruments, the body and the mind, are put to good use. Just as, you know, one can put the knife to a good use by chopping fruits and vegetables. So the child should inculcate this habit of putting these instruments to good use. Now, the question therefore arises whether integral education can be still treated as the same as holistic education. Perhaps not, because the concept of what is holistic can vary, and some people would consider that holistic probably means just the education of the body and the mind. So maybe to further clarify, we can say integral education is holistic education plus value education. But even that is not true, because integral education goes beyond value or moral education. Psychic education is not the same as value or moral education. How does it go beyond? It goes beyond because value or moral education is generally taken as telling the child a set of do's and don'ts. And that is something which doesn't really work, as we shall see in a moment. On the other hand, what psychic education does is to make the child realize the consequences of doing what is right and what is wrong, and realizing that the guidance for what is right and wrong comes from within. Nobody has to tell the child what is right and wrong. In fact, it's a misunderstanding to feel that unless we tell the child what is right and wrong, how will the child know it? The child knows what is right and wrong. For example, when Kavya picked up the clip, she knew she's doing something wrong. Even younger children, even 5-year-old children, if you ask them a question, the appropriate question, you realize that they already know what is right and what is wrong. But still they do many wrong things because evil can be tempting. It was tempting for Kavya to pick up the clip, but this doesn't stop with children. Adults are also tempted by crime or wrong things. A teenage boy is tempted to rape a girl. A businessman, further grown up, he is tempted to evade taxes. he wants to save something or income tax or something. That is tempting. So evil can be tempting. We all know what is right and wrong, but evil can be tempting. And in psychic education, therefore, we are not really giving the child a set of do's and don'ts. We are going beyond that. And why it is important to go beyond value or moral education is brought out here. Firstly, if we give the child a set of do's and don'ts, the child doesn't like it because nobody likes sermonizing, least of all a teenager who needs this the most. Secondly, since the child already knows what is right and wrong, only the answers may be right, but the child may not actually do it, which means that if there's an exam set up on value education, the child can easily score 100% marks because the child knows what is right and wrong, but giving the right answers doesn't ensure the child will actually practice them because evil can be tempting. And thirdly, if we give the child a set of what is right and what is wrong, it amounts to giving a child a fixed ethical code. And no ethical code has universal validity. Take a value like, say, always speak the truth. I'll give you a story, a real incident. In the year 2012, a gunman entered a school in the United States, in the state of Connecticut, and he went about shooting a large number of children and teachers in the school. In one of the classrooms, where the children were very small and the teacher heard all the commotion, she told the children to sit quietly in a cupboard and told them that when this person is gone, I'll take you out. As soon as she had finished depositing the children in the cupboards, this gunman appeared in that very room. And he asked the teacher, where are the children? She said the children have gone to the gym. He shot her dead and moved on. Later on, it was discovered that the children were sitting in the cupboards, and this is what the teacher had told them. Now, the teacher did a wonderful job. She herself might have survived if she had just left the children there and run away somewhere. But she took care of the children and then thought about herself. So she made the children safe. But then what did she do just before dying? She told a lie. She knew the children are in the cupboard, but she said the children have gone to the gym. Now, who told her that in this particular situation, telling a lie is better than speaking the truth? It was her inner voice. It was the voice of the soul that told her. So it is only that voice which can give us a situation-specific guidance. And therefore, that voice goes beyond, it transcends all ethical codes on which value education may be based. Last but not least, value education induces fear of external punishment. And this point is so important that it has been highlighted in the next slide. Value education may make the child feel that I have to avoid doing something wrong to escape punishment from the teacher or the parent. Now, all crime in society, in fact, thrives on this very mentality. When an adult commits a crime, he thinks that I'm doing it so cleverly that it will never be found out. And if nobody will find it out, then there'll be no punishment. So I can do it because evil is tempting. And if I'll not be caught, then I might as well do it. And the fact is that the amount of crime that is detected is only a small fraction of the crime that is committed. And the amount of crime that is punished is only a small fraction of the crime that is detected. Which means that this calculation that I'm doing it so cleverly that I'll not be found out actually works out. And that is because it's because of that crime continues. Now, what psychic education does is to make the child realize that if I do something wrong, I feel guilty, I lose peace of mind. Even when I feel that in case of Kavya, we saw that the chapter is closed, I need not worry about it anymore. Still, she could not forget it. So there's a recurrent uneasiness, one loses peace of mind. So if the child realizes that if I do something wrong, there is a punishment that comes from within. I feel guilty, I lose peace of mind, and this is a punishment nobody can escape. So if the child grows up with this learning, then the child is less likely to commit a crime. The child is less likely to grow up into an adult who will turn into a criminal, because the person knows that I might escape the police. I might escape punishment by law, but there's a punishment which comes from within, which I'll never be able to escape. And that is why going beyond value education, so-called value education or moral education, is important, and that is what psychic education does. One might say, well, in theory it sounds very good, but how to do it? The important thing is how not to do it. There's no fixed method for imparting psychic education. There's no separate period required, and there's no exam that needs to be set up. The teacher has to be conscious throughout the day that she has to also take care of helping the child pick up that I know what is right and wrong, and listening to this voice is in my own interest. It will give me the reward of immense joy and peace of mind. And if I ignore this voice, if I ignore this inner guidance, I will lose peace of mind. One of the important things in psychic education is that the teacher should be a role model, which means she herself should be on the same path. She herself should also be always striving to be a better person, because what the teacher or the parent does affects the child much more than what they say. By being conscious of it throughout the day, what the teacher can do is to exploit situations in the classroom. For example, if some child has forgotten to bring lunch and her friends are sharing their lunch with her, offering her lunch to her, she can encourage that activity. That is psychic education. She can tell them stories. One story, the way I told you, the Kavya's story. Yeah? Many more such stories can be constructed. She should tell them the right type of stories, and while telling the story, interrupt the story at the right moment, ask the right type of questions so that the child goes through a set of reflection. Why that is important is because the child might otherwise give an answer which is based on the thinking that this is what a good child does. So let me create a good impression on the teacher. But then if they take the child through a set of reflection, then the child realizes that, which means asking the right questions, so that the child herself comes out with those answers which will make the child reflect. So the child eventually realizes that I thought I'm saying this to create a good impression, but in fact, it is in my own interest to do it. It's not to impress the teacher that I have to do it. I should do it for my own peace of mind, to escape that punishment which nobody can escape. So that is what it will do. So just to sort of emphasize again, psychic being is the pivot around which the education of the instruments, that is the body and the mind, the mind including both the emotional part of the being and the intellect, the education of these instruments revolves around the psychic being, which is the dynamic aspect of the soul. So psychic being is not an additional component. It is the very pivot, the very center around which the education of these instruments, the body and the mind, is organized. There are many books on integral education. One of these I have written, and that has been published by Sri Aurobindo Ashram Delhi branch. You may not easily find it in a bookshop. The only way perhaps to get, or at least the only easy way to get the book, is to either visit the ashram or to write to the ashram. But you can easily get an e-book on Amazon. If you go to Amazon, you'll find the e-version of the book easily available. This is Sri Aurobindo Ashram Delhi branch, a picture postcard view of the ashram. You are most welcome here whenever you have an opportunity. And you can always ask me questions. on today's presentation or otherwise, or if you have any comments on today's presentation, you can write to me. Or if you want these slides which I have used for the presentation, I'll be happy to send them to you if you send an email. The email address is easy to remember: RAM for Ramesh, BIJ for Bijlani, and work to indicate that I hardly work. So rambijwork@gmail.com. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rameshji. You covered a lot, vast ground, and really bringing to focus the need for psychic education and how education can revolve around that. So thank you, able to get a glimpse into Sri Aurobindo and the mothers, the essence of it. So just opening up to questions, Amitji has his hand up. Please, Amitji. We'll keep them concise so we can have more.
Sure. Thank you for the presentation, Rameshji. My question is about right and wrong. It's like, at times while you are going through something, there are all the possibilities. At that time, you don't know what is right and what is wrong precisely. Or is there a way that Sri Aurobindo or the mother have suggested? I'm just wondering if you can give some insight into that. Thank you.
To discover the voice of the soul, one of the important things is to have silence in the background. Because this voice, the voice of the soul, is a rather shy and faint and non-assertive voice. In contrast, the voices of the emotional part of the being and the intellect are very noisy and persistent. And therefore, one has to create silence in the background to be able to hear this voice. And if we are careful, if we know that such a voice exists, and if we are receptive to it, then it may be shy and faint, but at the same time, it is an extremely clear voice. So we at once know that this is the right thing to do.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Rameshji.
Yes, one more important thing. If one is still in doubt, then one can ask one crucial question and answer it in total honesty. The question is, will this choice leave me with lasting mental peace? So if the answer is yes, then it is the voice of the soul. Because, even if we are able to justify something else through several reasons, the way we saw in this story, this Kavya's story, even if we are able to justify, if we are really honest to ourselves, we'll know that I may have many justifications, but still it will not leave me in lasting mental peace. Sooner or later, it will catch up with me and I'll be disturbed. It will haunt me. So this question is very important. If one can't make up one's mind, will it leave me in lasting mental peace?
Thank you, sir.
Very powerful statement and a very valuable pointer. Thank you, Rameshji. Rajati has her hand up.
Yes, good evening, sir. Good evening, everybody. Sir, it is I must tell you, my soul is so happy to listen to your words. And sir, it's about 10 years ago that I started experimenting. I think I should connect with you more and also read up more about the inner voice, sir. And I'm a trainer by profession, and I used to always, when I ask something and when I pause and say, now this is the answer you have given me in the outside, now just talk to yourself and, tell me, is this the same answer? I don't want to say if it is a yes or a no, just that, is it the same answer that you gave me? Okay. Sir, adults, the question I asked is, do you think you can make more time for your family? And adults said, no, absolutely not. And when I asked them to talk to the inner voice and come back, they said, the inner voice said otherwise. We can still do something. So I tried this with children as well. And this is so nice to know. My question is, sir, as parents, what is our role in this system, sir? Do you have certain expectations from the parents also? Because, sir, I think while they are in the school, but when the parents here at home, we are not okay with certain things. I mean, I think we should also connect with our inner voice. That's what I'm trying to say. So what kind of interventions or interactions you have with parents, sir?
We treat parents and teachers as one unit. And in fact, the child spends much more time at home than in the school, and therefore the parents also being in tune with this philosophy is important, and understanding the nuances of this inner voice as compared to just giving a set of do's and don'ts and threatening the child with external punishment. Instead of that, this is important. But then apart from the parents and the teachers, one thing more which is also important is the environment, the society around. Because these attitudes don't grow in a vacuum. So if the child finds that all around everybody is not following this inner voice, doing things which cannot be consistent with the inner voice, and yet these are the people who are becoming more successful in the sort of worldly sense, they are getting all the position, power and prestige and so on, then, for the child, it's very easy to feel that maybe that is the only way which works in the real world. And therefore, the environment also is very important. But certainly, that is something which as individuals we cannot change, but collectively we can change. And therefore, the more negative the environment, the more difficult psychic education, or for that matter, value education, the conventional value, both become very ineffective unless the social atmosphere is better. So the more negative it is, the more difficult it is to do these things.
Thank you, Rameshji. Lakshmi Priyaji has requested if there are any recommendations around courses, trainings, workshops, books, or diving deeper into integral education.
Yes, we keep doing workshops for school teachers, and I can tell the person who organizes these in our ashram to keep you on the mailing list. And apart from that, there are other centers also. There's one nearby in Gurugram, the Gnostic Center. They conduct these workshops. And I'm sure there are some organizations in Pondicherry which conduct these workshops. So there are plenty of workshops on integral education.
Thank you. So yeah, I'll share on our Google Classroom the PowerPoint. Thank you for offering it so kindly. And also the contact for the ashram. Any last comments or questions?
Put one on chat, Vipul, about which are the schools. Sorry, I missed the basic information here, if that's possible to share somewhere.
Yeah, the schools, I put them in the list also, Anand, that I've shared.
Got it.
But yeah, both in Pondicherry, Auroville, as well as Mirambika in Delhi. Yeah. Okay. Any last comments by you, Rameshji, before we close?
I have one doubt.
Okay.
Is it audible?
Sorry, there's one last question, I think.
Okay, last question.
Thanks, Rameshji. At the very beginning of your talk, you have mentioned the totality of the being, that is body, mind, and soul. And may you please explain what is mind and distinguish between mind and soul? Is there any definition or clarity in Sir Aurobindo and Mother's philosophy?
That's a good question, although to explain it fully may take a little longer than is possible today. But briefly, the confusion generally is between the emotional part of the being and the soul. You see, mind itself has two aspects, feeling and thinking, that we can understand. The confusion is generally between the emotional part of the being, not the intellect. Emotional part of the being and the soul. The reason why there is a confusion is that both are non-rational. Neither of these works on reason. But the difference is that the emotional part of the being can get tempted by evil and also can sometimes get drawn to what is good. It's not that it's always tempted only by evil, which means that it is an infra-rational part of the being, as Sri Aurobindo, using his terminology. It is infra-rational, but it can approach what can be supra-rational. On the other hand, the soul is only supra-rational, which means that reason is an intermediate tool. It's at an intermediate level. And both put together, the emotional part of the being and the intellect, are an instrument. just like the body. Whereas the soul is the divine essence, which manifests imperfectly through these instruments. So the body and the mind are both instruments, but since the instruments are manifestation of the perfect soul or the perfect divine, therefore they may be imperfect, but they are capable of moving towards perfection. So when the emotional part of the being moves towards perfection, its choices start coinciding more and more with the choices of the soul. And that is why this confusion. You know, when we do something good, we can't make out whether it came from the soul or it came from my heart. Heart is sometimes what our feelings, because both get joy, because joy is what the emotional part of the being is looking for. So we get that joy, we feel it came from the heart, it also came from the soul, the two coincide. And when the two coincide, the intellect generally falls in line easily, because the emotions are the dominant part of the mind, not reason. So the intellect easily falls in line. What it does is, then it invents reasons which will support the choice of the emotional part of the being, which is the same as the voice of the soul. So all three come together. And when all three come together, then what is the problem? The body is a poor docile instrument. It will do what all these three together are telling it to do. And that is what unification of the being is about. We achieve that unification temporarily every time we do something right. The key to good education and living life meaningfully is that this should become more and more frequent, this unification. And that is what takes us towards the ultimate goal of life, which is union with the divine, union with the creator, becoming one with the creator. So becoming one with the creator is basically becoming one with the divine aspect of our own being, which is the soul.
Wow, that was amazing. Pat, thank you, Sugita ji, for asking that question, just as we were to close. And Ramesh ji, we are so grateful for your power-packed presentation. And like your introduction reads, you offered us more than small doses of love and wisdom through your presence. We hope to engage further. Thank you so much on behalf of the Bodhi participants and Anadi Foundation. And we'll close with a chant. So just inviting everyone to join in. Loka samasta sukhino bhavantu. Loka samasta sukhino bhavantu. Loka samasta sukhino bhavantu. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Namaste and good evening to everyone.